love about working in the marine environment is the large and unique number of species I get to see on a daily basis. The reason for this is that Trinidad and Tobago has one of the highest levels of biodiversity in the entire Caribbean. My name is Atish Kanhai, and I'm a marine biologist specializing in benthic ecology. One of the exciting things for me as a benthic ecologist is that we have one of the highest levels of benthic organisms in the entire world. A high level of biodiversity is something that we should celebrate as citizens of this country. One of the cool things about such a diverse habitat is there may be organisms that have not yet been discovered. For this reason, we should protect and conserve our biodiverse habitats as much as possible so that we may not lose anything that we have not yet discovered.
At my core, biodiversity is what makes me Belizean. Our Belize Barrier Reef, the second largest in the world at 195 miles, cements that fact. But in a changing world, climate change threatens Belize's ecosystems and more. The cost for inaction is irrefutable. It's our way of life. My name is Carolee Chanona, and as a Belizean, I'm here to shed light on what threatens our collective climate-resilient future, with a focus on the Belize Barrier Reef and all its ripples. Whether it's our more than 40% tourism-reliant GDP, over 15,000 commercial fishers, or coastal communities at risk, there is no time to waste. Time is now.
And we are actually going to be hearing from Carolee a bit later because January 1st marked the relaunch of Cari-Bois, now a Caribbean-wide network of environmental content creators dedicated equally to educating the population about the Caribbean's vast biodiversity. They also focus on telling some inconvenient truths about climate impacts on the development paths pursued by countries of the region. And they also focus on celebrating the wins of sustainable practices and progressive actions. So as I mentioned before, joining us, of course, is Tyrell Gittens, who, of course, is a Cari-Bois coordinator and editor, and Miss Carolee Chanona, who we saw there, who is a writer. Now, Carolee is actually in Belize. She's joining us from Belize. And, of course, Tyrell is all the way in the cold, cool England. And we're going to be talking a bit about Cari-Bois Network this morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on The Now Show.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Trinidad.
Now, I'm going to go across to you first, Tyrell, because I just wanted us to start in terms of, who is what is the Cari-Bois News Network, and what are the content creators focused on? What sort of information are they putting out there?
Yeah, so firstly, the Cari-Bois Environmental News Network is the brainchild of the Cari-Bois Foundation, and it was started 2 years ago thanks to the support of the European Union's CSO for Good Governance project. And we have been able to continue the work we are doing at Cari-Bois thanks to the support of the Answer Merchant Bank, Caribbean Natural Capital Hub. So basically, Cari-Bois Environmental News Network was started as an initiative recognizing that there was a gap in environmental, in the role that citizens play in environmental journalism and, citizen journalism related to the environment. It was important for the Cari-Bois Foundation to start Cari-Bois because it is important to have lived experiences. It's all well and fine that there is the established media, but as well as the lived experiences in persons who actually are, at the front line of environmental changes and, various extractive industries that may impact the communities and their natural environment. Cari-Bois wanted to empower citizens across Trinidad and Tobago to tell those stories. So it started with a training of about 30 to 40 citizen journalism and giving them the capacity building and the tools to empower them as citizen journalists. And while recognizing the importance of the environment, not only to the world over, but particularly to the Caribbean region, we saw it fit at the Cari-Bois Foundation to take the network regionally and help empower citizen journalists in other Caribbean countries to tell stories about the environment. So in our relaunch, over the past several months, I've been working with incredible journalists such as Carolee and different storytellers to create stories about the natural environment in the Caribbean and really place a spotlight on some of the issues that are facing the environment, but how we could also, create awareness and change. So Carolee is one
No,
creator from
Tyrell.
Belize.
I know that you, well, of course, the concept of Cari-Bois, of course, it relies heavily on the citizen journalist. And so I'm wondering, does the person have to be a journalist? Because I know your background as well is in journalism. So if somebody wants to get on board, do they have to be a journalist with prior experience? Or as you mentioned, is it all about coming together with the interest and then going through the program and getting the tools to tell the story?
Yes, brilliant question. So a short answer is no. So very soon we'll put out a call for anyone interested around the Caribbean in submitting stories and videos and so forth on the environment to get involved with us, and we want to make this network accessible to everyone. So we welcome everyone with story ideas about their communities and the environment to get in touch with us at the Copper Foundation and at Cari-Bois. So yeah, to submit their stories. We want
Yeah.
everyone on board.
Now, Carolee, I'm coming to you because I know that you are a content creator. We just saw your video, of course, with you telling your story as it relates to Belize. What has your experience been? And even before that, why were you encouraged to join the Cari-Bois News Network?
Thanks for that question. So really, I am an environmentalist at heart. So when I was approached with this opportunity, I really jumped at it because it gave me a platform to then bring my issues here in Belize as a Belizean to a regional level, which is really the heart of Cari-Bois Network. It's citizen journalism. You know, we're the ones on the ground experiencing this firsthand, whether it's climate change, it's, you know, coastal erosion, it's, biodiversity loss. All of these different issues now have a platform to live on in multi um, different forms. It's not just written word; it's spoken word. It's video form. It's photography, and there's a place for us to now bring our regions together to tackle these issues holistically as well.
Yeah. And why was that decision taken to make this a regional entity rather than something that's just based in one separate country? And anyone can take this question, whether it's Carolee or Tyrell.
All right. Well, I definitely, and I'll also give Carolee the opportunity to respond as well. And I just think that the environment is something that is important to the survival of everyone in the Caribbean. So it's very important that we work together to not only learn more about the issues affecting the natural environment, but create solutions.
Yeah. Carolee?
I just wanted to echo on that and say public engagement and demand for meaningful action is really where the solutions lie. You know, we say these catchphrases as like 1.5 to stay alive, but we need a pathway forward that is credible. And a lot of the climate change affected regions, such as the Caribbean, you know, small developing island states, we're the first ones impacted. You know, we need to start talking as a collective and moving a path forward. It also impacts traditional income generators like fishing. We're a very nature-based tourism economy here in Belize, so climate change needs to be in every conversation. That's not just Belize as well. You know, that's the Caribbean, especially as small developing island states. If we're talking as a region, our voice is a lot more louder.
Yeah. Carolee, as you're on that point, because you did mention climate change, I'm wondering what are some of the other dire environmental issues that we are facing at this time? And of course, you can use Belize as a reference point, but even if you have any other examples throughout the region.
Well, as I mentioned, Belize climate change is one of the largest. Climate change needs to really be in every conversation. It's a threat amplifier. But in addition to that, I would also say climate funding. You know, we can't separate environmental issues and economic development anymore. The only path forward needs to be sustainable development. I know oil is a big industry, or the main industry rather, in Trinidad and Tobago. Belize, about 45% is the last estimate for our tourism GDP. Second to that is agriculture. We need to have a path forward for funding, and as you know, we're all developing states. You know,
Yeah.
although Trinidad is probably the most developed in the region, Belize is getting there, but we don't want to get that path forward through oil. So I think climate financing is also a very big issue, and we can't tackle any of these issues without funding behind it. And that also requires the developed states to take responsibility for their actions. And when we are the ones experiencing climate change and its effects firsthand.
Tyrell, I'm going to come across to you to ask you the same question. What are some of those regional effects, or even as it relates to TNT as well?
Yeah, so I think Carolee would have made brilliant points. I think the first, major issue that we have to deal with in the Caribbean is, of course, climate change. Apart from just mitigating our emissions, finding ways to adopt more environmentally friendly practices. We also need to find ways to adapt in the Caribbean to living with climate change. It's something that's here and it's something that we have to unfortunately learn to live with. And as Carolee would have highlighted, funding is one of those major issues. So there we need to call on the global north, which is traditionally referred to as developed countries, to make investments and to recognize their roles in climate change. We also want to ensure that we have sustainable economies. So economies that it needs to be a balanced relationship. Of course, we are going to have to use resources, but we want to use resources sustainably. So around the Caribbean, we need to find ways to make our fisheries more sustainable. And in countries like Trinidad and Tobago, which depends on oil, or even Guyana, which is now joining the conversation with their recent oil discovery and how they will be producing oil. Uh, a question for Guyana now is, sustainable development and yes, developing sustainably. So I think in the Caribbean, it's adapting to climate change and, of course, developing sustainable economies that could not only withstand environmental shocks, but could, of course, reduce the impact on the natural environment.
Yeah. And Tyrell, going back to the relaunch of the news network, I mean, who are you producing this content for, and what sort of impact are you looking for with the relaunch?
Yes, so as we have been saying, in the meeting rooms, we do not want to preach to the choir. Being an environmentalist myself, I know that there are a lot of environmentalists in Trinidad and Tobago and around the Caribbean, but we really want to reach the wider public and people who want to become more informed about the natural environment, some of the issues facing the natural environment, and how they could live, more sustainably. And for those persons, again, as I would have highlighted earlier on, who may have ideas about how they could tell the story about the environment in their communities, we want them to reach out and get involved because we want to empower them in their communities to really take the stewardship and custodianship of the environment and really, help create transformative change. It's all well and fine that we usually, make these issues about climate funding and so forth, but at the root of it all, it's about the community. It's rooted in the heart of the community, and that's where Cari-Bois wants to reach the
Yeah.
community. And I do believe around the Caribbean there is interest, and Cari-Bois will help tap into that interest for
And Tyrell,
environmental
quickly,
content.
of course, you mentioned you don't want to preach to the choir, you want it to be open. And so for an average citizen listening, how can we help, reduce our carbon footprint and ensure that we have a greener and cleaner economy?
Yes, I will encourage, as I would have said earlier, these issues are sometimes spoken to in such large terms, but it all comes down to what we can do on an individual level. Of course, I understand people have different socioeconomic realities, but if you can invest in solar power to reduce, your use on our natural resources, invest in solar power, invest in an electric vehicle, or if it's as simple as reducing the amount of plastics that you could do simple things like that, being conscious about the food that you eat and just learning. There's a lot of information out there. Of course, we encourage you to get in touch with reliable and reliable sources like Cari-Bois and other environmental sources, but learn. There are many ways that you could contribute to more environmentally conscious practices.
Nice. Well, let me thank you so much for joining us, Tyrell. I'm sending you all the warmth from TNT. And of course, Carolee, I know you already have that warm weather in Belize. So thank you so much for joining us here on the Now Morning Show. And all the best, of course, with the relaunch of the News Network.
I need it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Platform.
And that were two representatives from the Cari-Bois Environmental News Network, just talking about the relaunch and, of course, their citizen journalist program where you yourself can tell stories about the environment. Stay with us because up next we have arts and culture, and we are going to also be taking your calls as we continue our tribute to Black Stalin. Stay with us.